Thank you for your time, for attending my talk. Much appreciated. I know the timing's not ideal, we're clashing with lunchtime, but yeah, thank you very much for making your presence. So, the future of the data center is cloud native. It just may not be the way that you currently think about it. What I'll do is I think that it's worth unpacking the cloud native aspect. We'll talk a little bit about the data center. I've also got a short, brief slide on the business values and how technology imperatives essentially drive that outcome. So I'll break it all down, and hopefully you'll be aligned with our way of thinking. So before we proceed, who am I? In my current form, I'm a pre-sales solution architect. Been with Mirantis for a couple of years now. I've worked in the IT industry now for well over 20 years or so. And this talk is quite an interesting talk for me to give because I've had a lot of experience within infrastructure environments, worked across data centers, worked across numerous sectors. I've been around the block a bit where I've worked for DXC Technology, I've worked for IBM, Fujitsu, and personally it's quite nice working for a smaller, more agile organization. But yeah, essentially that's my background. So let's unpack the term cloud native. What does this mean from an application perspective? That's always an interesting question. So the current stream of thought is along the lines of, all right, let's look at decomposing our monolithic approach. Let's look at addressing this from a microservices perspective. Let's containerize our applications. But there is also that perspective where virtualization hasn't gone away. It's not out of the equation. So when you look at it from that perspective, then application-wise, there are still workloads, and there's plenty of them that are still running virtualized. So when you do shift your application to a cloud environment and utilize the services available there, be it perhaps in a microservices-oriented architecture, but also from a virtualization point of view, you're still utilizing cloud services to enable you to make your application effectively cloud native. That's how we look at it from within Mirantis. How did we get here? Hyperscalers. It's worth mentioning the hyperscalers. So, from a hyperscaler's point of view, what have they brought to the party? And I know we're now looking at probably over a decade or so back, but they address scale, and they address scale in such a fashion that they enable you to have resource, capacity, services available through a consumption model that enables you to utilize your services, your solution components on a pay-as-you-go basis. How do they achieve this? Ultimately, they achieve it through running infrastructure as code. Automation, automation, automation. That's absolutely essential. Services, how do they present those services and make those available for consumption? Again, it's all underpinned at scale through the consumption model and available in a very predefined fashion. It can be tied into a very cloud-centric approach. But what they do address, which takes a lot of the hassle away for enterprises, is the whole lifecycle management piece. The underpinning is all taken care of through that. Also, they take care of the operational aspect, the whole visibility, the logging, monitoring, and alerting. That is all taken care of. They're taking a lot of the hassle away for large enterprises, what we've typically had to address ourselves, working in a large enterprise. Now, the hyperscalers have taken care of that. That's the point I've made there, is that it is literally all taken care of. They take that problem away. Now let's look at this also from a data center perspective. So historically, investment within your projects within a data center, within a typical enterprise, has been on a per business requirement basis. So there's a gap there already. Environments are segregated and autonomous. So when you adopt this approach where you're addressing on a per business, per requirement basis, naturally the byproduct will be that you will maneuver towards a more segregated, autonomous environment. That's what we are typically seeing. They're lacking to scale that ability that the hyperscalers provide you. The level of services, scale, the consumption model, that's not being addressed. Infrastructure provisioning, typically within your own data center, that takes time. Okay, we have a degree of automation, but are we anywhere near the size and scale that the hyperscalers operate at? I'd argue not. Lifecycle management, another key pain point. That's a real issue we find for a lot of our clients. So addressing lifecycle management, your patches, your updates, your upgrades, managing that, getting your maintenance windows, it's all very challenging. Called out operations there, and it's all about, once you have your environment up and running, it doesn't mean it takes care of itself. You still have to operationally manage it, and that is in itself a job. Just moving on from the data center, I'd like to mention how business outcomes are essentially at the heart of this. And typically, our technology imperatives are there to address that. So if you look at it from your technology requirements, you want speed. Reduce the cycle time and innovate faster. Bring that to your environment within your enterprise. Agility, you want that critical application flexibility, performance at scale. What does it mean? It means you can meet the demand of your customers. Simplicity as well, reducing complexity and that cost in the owned infrastructure. If you can address that, you can act and operate like a service provider. So back to my point regarding hyperscalers, the more that we maneuver ourselves with addressing these points, the closer we become to becoming truly cloud native within our data center. Security, that's naturally a given. It's always something we have to address. But essentially, through providing those layers of security within our solution and within our environment, you're mitigating and eliminating risk. So, what is the future of the data center from our perspective in Mirantis? Cloud native is the only way forward. We have to get ourselves there. You want to be able to, as I said, there's still the view that we have virtualized workload, we have containerized workload. We want to address both. Why the data center boundary? Now this is an interesting one. So for us, we don't want to, from our perspective, say limit yourself to the boundary of a data center. When you're looking at your environment and where you need to deploy your services to host your applications, essentially, why have a data center boundary? You could be having to deploy at edge locations. You could be utilizing multiple cloud environments as well. So why within, when you term data center, why define yourself by a physical boundary? Also within the data center, you'd want to provide the automation just like the hyperscalers. Absolutely essential. Effectively plug and play. You want to provide services just like the hyperscalers as well. That's absolutely key, so that you can enable all of those business outcomes I just talked about. And then you want to address scalability in an automated fashion, just like the hyperscalers. If we can bring all of that to our data center now, yeah, we're now becoming cloud native. You want to provide operational visibility and the capability just like the hyperscalers. If we can do that, now we're really moving in the right direction. But how about we offer choice, unlike the hyperscalers? So typically you deploy your application within an environment, be it AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Platform, the main three. What if you could deploy your environment across any of those clouds and you still get access to the same APIs, the same approach? Your developers essentially are driving the same outcome, but across different cloud platforms, getting the same look and feel, not being tied in to a specific approach. What if you could offer standardization as well, regardless of the environment, unlike the hyperscalers? So we're now saying within the data center, a degree of flexibility, where you're providing a standardized approach regardless of it being within the physical boundary or at the edge or even out with one of the hyperscalers. Also, we see this as you'd want this to be deployable via common interface. So if you've got a centralized point of access, and through that, you're now able to deploy the accommodating environment for your application regardless of where they sit. And I've just added a point there regarding open source innovation. So within Mirantis, we believe that is something that is essential to driving us to this cloud native data center. So from our perspective, let me just talk about Mirantis Flow. What we provide, essentially, or what we want to address, is unleashing your developers and architects from infrastructure management. Why would they need to take care of all the underlying components, all the operational aspects, the lifecycle management, as I mentioned? What if you could have, through a Mirantis Cloud Native Data Center, orchestrated through Mirantis Container Cloud, self-service virtualization? That's all taken care of. You don't have to handle the hassle of that. Self-service, on-demand, complete Kubernetes as a service. Imagine that within your data center, as well as, like I said, beyond the boundaries of that. Built-in monitoring, logging, and alerting. Just happens out of the box. It's all taken care of. Deployment and onboarding. So deployment of these technologies, onboarding of these technologies that enable this approach, that's all. And 24/7, 365, proactive operations and support for this environment. So our view is that we move you to a cloud native data center approach, but we take all the trouble away for you, just as you would expect of a hyperscaler. How do we do that? So I mentioned on the previous slide, a core component for us is the Mirantis Container Cloud solution. That enables us to address multiple environments, multiple platforms, address workload, which I talked about from a cloud native perspective, but also for those applications hasn't gone, it hasn't left the equation. We could address that as well. That's something that we can take care of in the cloud. How do we do that? I mentioned the point earlier about automation, automation, automation. We take care of all of that through that component shown there. We can enable you to deploy your containerization application, your applications that are containerized. And we're also regardless of what the pinning environment is. So you've got, as we're saying, support for running your solution on Azure, on AWS, could be on-premise within your data center. Typically, you'll have VMware running, OpenStack. Bare metal, do you want to deploy your clusters on bare metal? That's also something that we provide through our Mirantis Flow solution. We've partnered with Equinix Metal. Through that, you can have your own data center environment, through which we're now solution components, containerized applications. We're good. I thought I lost sound then. Yeah, so essentially you can address still your containerization, your virtualization, all again through utilizing these solution elements here. How do we provide the operational visibility? We've got our solution component called Stacklight. That is where we're utilizing open source innovation. We're utilizing things like Elastic, LogSearch, Grafana, Kibana, FluentD. And what we've done is harnessed all of that open source innovation to effectively enable our customers to have all of that insight, all that operational visibility for both their virtualized and containerized workload. Now, when you look at that from a data center perspective, you are now maneuvering to a truly cloud-native approach. That's what we address through Mirantis Flow. I mentioned security from a business perspective. We also have our solutions here with secure registry. That's out of the box with Mirantis Flow. Through that, you can scan your images, make sure you're not deploying that is exposing an exploit. That's absolutely critical. But not only just do we address that, also from what we're running in terms of the actual runtime, the container runtime, is FIPS 140 validated, it's compliant. When we look at the Mirantis Kubernetes engine, that is the only FIPS compliant Kubernetes distribution that you can utilize, so it ticks the box for you within your data center, as well as beyond that. Also shown here are a couple of our open source innovations. So whilst we're harnessing open source technologies, why not contribute back? That's where we have Lens, which is our open source IDE effectively, works with any Kubernetes distribution. You can upload your cluster into the environment, just as simple as cut and pasting a kube config in, and you've got that visibility and that ability to work with your Kubernetes clusters. That's an open source component, along with K-Zeros. K-Zeros is a lightweight distribution of Kubernetes. We're currently having discussions with a customer where we're looking at deploying that more at the deep edge. So I mentioned the edge, but when you've got something so lightweight and you can deploy that at the deep edge and look at containerization from an IoT perspective, we're addressing that. But pulling it back to the cloud-native data center, where do we fit? So essentially, this illustration here is showing how we fit in terms of we provide a whole stack. So the software-defined networking component, we take care of that. That is part of our deployment through our automated process. The network management, network security, see how we bleed into that from a data center perspective, because we take care of those components. Again, harnessing the power of open source. Bare metal and infrastructure management, utilizing our Mirantis Flow solution, that's also taken care of. The compute, the storage elements. And then, as I was saying, from an application perspective, virtual and container management. Essentially, this is all about building up the layers that enables you to run this part here, which is your applications. Ultimately, all of what we do within an infrastructure is enable the ability to deploy applications. So from a virtual container and management perspective as well, we've got the layer there that's showing the operating system. We take care of all of that. We take care of the whole stack. What does it culminate to? It enables virtualization, containerization, addressing your serverless requirements, built-in identity and access management. So essentially, we're addressing the whole stack that you would specifically see more so from your hyperscalers. So just in terms of key messages that I'd like to emphasize from my talk, we're saying that we want to be enablers for a paradigm shift. So what we're saying from our perspective as well is that the power of choice shifts to the cloud customer from the cloud provider. We're the only provider of a cloud-native platform that enables companies to leverage different cloud providers without building custom interfaces. We take away all of that trouble. Liberate your staff. What does that mean? It means that you don't have to focus, they don't have to focus on managing and operating that underlying infrastructure. That all goes away. That's taken care of by us. Virtualization and containerization. So I touched upon how, from a cloud native perspective, we're still seeing a lot of virtualization out there as well. Not everything has been decomposed. Not everything has shifted towards this whole containerization approach. So we provide you with one platform to provide you all of your core infrastructure needs. We're taking away that problem. Empowering open source. So we all know open source has really evolved over time. We can see the benefit in harnessing that open source innovation. What we allow you to do is implement a sustainable open source strategy, ultimately empowering your operations staff, your application developers. We've seen a whole shift. So for us, when we look at the key messages here, from a data center perspective, it is all about driving that cloud native approach. That was pretty quick, but any questions? Any feedback? Or no? Well, I'd like to thank you for your time, and pleasure speaking with you. We're over at the stand if you want to talk. Thank you.